Hello, Woøk. Hello, others. Um, I realize the video is a bit late today, but I am recording it on a Tuesday, so I think that ought to count for something. So today I'm going to just talk about things that are on my mind. Uh, I don't really have a solid theme exactly. I I had one in mind last go round, but yeah, there's been a lot of stuff lately, so I guess I'll just sort of talk about everything. Um, yeah, everything within the parameters of my world. Everything in general would take a bit too long, even long-winded as I am. Okay, so where do I start? Um, I recently uh, got back in touch with my mother, my adopted mother, and have been made aware of a lot of things that are going on in my family, particularly the ill health of my grandparents. Now, as I've mentioned before, I was adopted when I was 8 years old, and very abruptly, within the span of probably 2 months, I met a whole slew of people who had become my new relatives, and over time, I, uh, I've reached the point where I don't regard them as anything but my relatives, and I mean that spans across my whole adopted family. I have a vague recollection of one of my biological grandmothers, well, two, and my biological grandfather, after whom I named myself. Um, Even though at the time I wasn't aware he was my grandfather, but that's neither here nor there. What the point is with one grandfather is suffering a uh, from a well, unfortunately, likely terminal form of bone cancer, and another one having just had open heart surgery, and um, one of my grandmothers also quite ill. It's occurring to me not just how important they've been in my life, but how lucky I am to be almost 30 years old and still have grandparents who are, or at least until, well, no, that's not even true. I was going to say until recently have been in a very active state, but really, even to this point, I spoke to my grandpa, who we call Nice Boy today, and I asked him how he was doing, and he has bone cancer, and he said, "Well, I'm getting a little bit old, but other than that, everything's fine," and that's sort of indicative of the sort of vibrance and life that he's always had. Um, so I'm going to tell quick little stories, little snippets about my grandparents, just things that I remember, one little story a piece. Um, so I'll start on my mom's side of the family. Her father is Grandpa Nice Boy, and he, well, he, I've done a lot of things with him, but two things stick out to me most. One is he taught us how to trap animals, particularly muskrat and also beaver on occasion. Um, and then also showed us how to skin them, and then he would sell the pets at, I think, some fur trade auction. I'm not entirely sure about that, but that always stuck in my mind, and that's an experience that is rapidly fading from much of the world's culture, but particularly American culture. And I've been very grateful my whole life for that. He also taught me how to ride a horse. He had a horse called Cheyenne, and taught me how to ride. Um, And he also had, I don't know how many beagles, um, always one at a time, but they were always named Macho. It didn't matter if they were male or female; they were always called Macho. So those are the immediate things that flash to mind when I think about him. We also taught us how to play the card game Casino, which was an amazing lot of fun. So his wife, who we call Mookie, um, she is. I think the best explanation about her I can give is to tell a story about we all went out to Wyoming once together, and so we're riding in the car, and then we'll pull off to the side of the road to have snacks or whatever, and this story keeps being told back to me, and so even though I was 8 or 9 years old when it happened, it's always remained in stunning clarity in my mind. We were sitting in the bed of my father's pickup truck. I think it was a red and gray Chevy Silverado, and so we got the tailgate down. We're sitting on the back of it, and she and I are sitting back there. We'd been having as snacks like crackers and Easy Cheese, and I can't remember if it was my mom or my father or who, but someone came around the back, and Grandma Mookie and I were squeezing the Easy Cheese just directly into each other's mouths, and that was always funny. And the other thing about them is that we had the major family holiday dinners with them, and the holidays with religious significance. The religious side of things was never glossed in their house. My grandfather would always read a passage from the Bible, and we'd sit and talk about what it meant. And while I don't identify as a Christian anymore, I can't deny that both of them had a heavy influence on my view of morality, which is incredibly Western and quite Christian as well. So that's my mom's family. And on my dad's side, there are two sets of grandparents. His parents were divorced and then remarried. My grandpa Archie, he died a couple of years back, 2 Octobers ago. He had a lot of upper respiratory issues, and he was on oxygen. But there were anybody who has ever heard me talk about my family will know the story I'm about to tell. He, when I was a kid, my brother Philip and I had a tendency to be kind of a pain in the ass, and my grandfather had this I guess it was a trailer, but nicer than that sounds, out in the rural area near this town called Cadillac, Michigan, and excuse me. So Philip and I are up late one night. There's a big rainstorm happening, and every time the thunder and lightning goes, we giggle. And my grandpa yells from the bedroom, telling us to knock it off, to be quiet. And so, as little kids will do, someone goes, and then we both, crack up laughing. And so he comes out and tells us to knock it off, be quiet. He goes back to bed. And so it happens again. Like as he's walking away, I genuinely think Philip was the one who did it, but I laughed loudest. As Grandpa was walking away, each step he took, Philip went, and being 8 or 9 years old, I cracked up laughing. Maybe 10 at the time. Anyway, so as though I still don't find that sort of thing funny. I do. So my grandfather came out, picked me up in my sleeping bag, walked outside and just sat me on the picnic table. Big thunderstorm happening. Walked back inside, left me there. And Now, I realize some people might be shaking their heads about this, like, oh, you shouldn't do that to kids, whatever. And I had a bit of a grudge towards him about it for a while until I realized that, like, the way that he dealt with that, I never again did anything really to go against what he said. And nothing that he did in taking that action did any harm whatsoever to me. I mean, I cried because I was a little bratty kid and, screamed and wanted to be let back in. And when he let me back in, like 10, 20 minutes later, I knew he wasn't fucking around, and so I went to sleep. And I realize that to many that doesn't sound like a fun story, but it created a deeper relationship between me and him, to where I always knew that if I talked to him about anything or asked him about anything, he was always going to give me an honest answer. He was never going to throw any bullshit. He was going to say what he thought and what he meant, and that was going to be it. Now, his wife, by contrast, who was my adopted father's mother, Archie was her second husband. So my grandma Joan was, and still is, one of the sweetest people I've ever met in my entire life. Now, unfortunately, as a little kid, that meant that we thought we could get away with anything with her, which was part of what led to the incident up in the trailer in Cadillac with my grandpa, because with Grandma we could get away with anything, and she would let it go, and then when he was around, we didn't do anything at all. But it's not that I really wanted to focus on. It's about I'm going here with just sort of the images that flash to mind when I think of them. And for her, I always think about this, the upstairs of the house that they had. There were 2 bedrooms. One had 2 twin beds in it, and one had 1 queen-sized bed. Since I was the older brother, I usually got to stay in that room. Philip would fuss sometimes, and then I'd switch out for a night, but then I would always go back. But that room had everything Pinocchio in it. And I don't mean necessarily like Disney Pinocchio. There were a couple of those, but I mean like Carlo Collodi, old school Pinocchio, including old editions of the book with full beautiful illustrations. And so I always think about that version of Pinocchio, and particularly the character of the fairy with the turquoise hair, when I think about her. There's something in that sort of forbearance and letting everything go, no matter how much of a shithead you are, that the fairy exhibited towards Pinocchio until Pinocchio finally grew up and became a real boy. And that sort of patience and constance was always exhibited by my grandma. And so that's sort of the first thing that comes to mind with her. All right. Final push, 2 more grandparents. All right, so for these grandparents, my dad's dad and stepmom, my grandpa Jan, we used to call Grandpa Goofy when we were younger, because he used to do a lot of strangish things. We thought, like he would sing the song "Hi Ho" from the Disney Snow White movie and do this little march step to it. But the things that I remember there, he lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and after I was about 11 or 12, he had a home in Negaunee, which is just outside of Marquette. But then he bought this farm up near Baraga, and it was a sort of like feral apple orchard, had been a tended orchard a number of years back, and had reverted, and new crossbreeds had happened that were sort of, natural-ish in that they weren't pushed by a human. But so a lot of my memories with them have to do with apples. Particularly, we would always go and camp Once they had the farm, he actually made a campsite up on this hill looking out over everything. It's a beautiful spot, and we would go up for apple picking season. And one year I was up there, it was just me, Philip, and my dad. And my dad was reading the world's longest novel to us. It's called Northwest Passage, and it drags on forever. And as someone who is incredibly long-winded, for me to say that, it is the most long-winded book I've ever, well, listened to, but, read. So my father was reading to us. My grandpa was in the tent, and then he left, my grandfather, that is, and we heard him sort of walk away, and my father was reading, and then about 15 minutes later, my dad's describing from the book a scene in this bar, and the character who's speaking, who I'm reasonably sure his name was Captain Ogden, I don't know why I remember that, but my dad's describing this scene, and the character is describing something, and the line says, it's like he looked around for a simile. It's like X thing. But my dad said he looked around for a smile. And then out of the shadows and darkness, my grandfather's voice rolls into our tent and goes, simile. And all three of us collectively jumped. And my dad actually whooped and then went, I thought you left. And that was funny. But then with my grandma Marilyn, actually, a lot of my memories involve apples. She taught us how to press cider, how to make apple pie, how to make apple sauce, dirt. Sorry. And that was always fun, but she also spent a lot of time playing board games with us, and sometimes sort of unusual ones. I mean, there was your Monopoly and your Trivial Pursuit, but then there were also ones like, there was one called Key to the Kingdom, which is ridiculous and involves a board that folds over itself and unfolds in different ways. Then there was another one, and I can't remember the name of it, but it took place in Revolutionary era America, and actually had shillings as currency and things like that, and it was such a fun game. But I've always associated that with her, both because she bought it for me and because she had a PhD in U.S. history, and so she bought me the book Johnny Tremaine. And damn, I thought I had the name of it for a second. I lost it. Anyway, that game. And so I've always associated that and the apple things, and she also made chocolate chip zucchini bread a lot. And so those are the things that I always associated with her. And yeah, so that was the very long, almost 20-minute story of my grandparents. And since they've been on my mind lately, I'm glad that I got to tell it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now there's a little bit more personal about me flying out on this channel. And yeah, so yeah. The there's a line from a song by the rapper Common. Well, it's actually just a very long verse, but it ends, I'm never looking back or too far in front of me. The present is a gift, and I just want to be. And that's what I mean. Just be. All right. See you next time. Adios.